The wind howled across the jagged coastline, carrying with it the scent of salt and storm. On the edge of the barren shore stood Jonas Keene, a war veteran, whose eyes still carried the shadows of battles long past. His figure was weathered like the driftwood scattered at his feet, yet steady, unyielding against the biting air. Beside him waited his two companions, Atlas, a German shepherd with the stance of a sentinel, and Luna, a restless husky whose icy eyes seemed to pierce the mist. The three of them stood before a crumbling house on a desolate rock, a so-called inheritance that others had mocked as worthless. Jonas had been given nothing of the riches his family once boasted, only this ruin by the sea, a rusted key, and the faint memory of a promise never explained. To the world, it was a cruel joke. To Jonas, burdened by silence and scars, it was a puzzle he could not ignore. Atlas leaned forward, ears raised as if sensing danger. Luna paced at the shoreline, pawing the ground with uneasy energy. Something about this place called to them, something deeper than broken walls and weather-beaten wood. Why here? Why him? And why now, after all he had endured? Was this inheritance truly worthless? Or was it hiding a secret that no one else had cared to see? Today, we invite you to walk alongside Jonas Keene and his loyal dogs, Atlas and Luna. Join us in uncovering the truth hidden beneath the waves and stone. Tell us where you're watching from, and share your thoughts as we explore this forgotten inheritance together. Because as Jonas pushed open the door to the house, the air seemed to shift heavy with mystery. Whatever lay beyond was not an ending, it was only the beginning. Jonas Keene tightened his grip on the rusted key in his hand as the sea wind whipped against his face, the cries of gulls mingling with the endless roar of waves. The opening of his journey had begun with laughter. Not his own mockery from those who believed the inheritance left to him was nothing more than a cruel joke, a decaying house stranded on a lonely rock. Yet here he was, standing at the edge of a road that seemed to stretch into nowhere, carrying not wealth or recognition, but a question that demanded an answer. Atlas trotted close at his side, the German shepherd's frame solid and steady, his amber eyes ever vigilant. Luna, restless and sharp, paced ahead, the husky's pale gaze constantly flicking toward the horizon, as if already sensing the path they were about to take. Together, they formed a trio, marked not by glory, but by resilience. And though the world had dismissed Jonas, these two creatures would never abandon him. The drive away from the life he had known was long, a trail of cracked highways and forgotten small towns where strangers looked at him without recognition or judgment. He sat behind the wheel of his battered truck, its engine coughing with every hill, the dogs filling the silence with their presence. Atlas sat tall in the passenger seat, head tilted slightly toward Jonas as if to remind him he was not alone. Luna leaned against the back window, her breath fogging the glass, as she let out impatient whines whenever the road stretched too long without change. The world outside shifted from bustling cities to winding rural stretches, the lights fading into darkness, and the endless expanse of land giving way to the smell of salt drifting inland. Jonas thought of the house often during that drive. It was not a home in the traditional sense, not a place of safety or joy. It was a test, a burden disguised as a gift. He had survived the battlefield, with scars visible and unseen, had walked away from the chaos of war, only to find himself a stranger in his own family. While others had inherited money, property, and comfort, he had been handed silence, decay, and questions. Still, there was something in him that refused to walk away. The memory of his grandfather's voice lingered faint and weathered. Not everything of value shines in gold, Jonas. Sometimes the worth of a man is measured in what others throw away. Those words pressed against his chest as firmly as the steering wheel beneath his hands. Night fell heavy during the second day of travel, the kind of darkness that swallowed the road, until only the narrow beams of his headlights carved a path forward. Atlas leaned against him, resting his head on Jonas's arm, grounding him when exhaustion began to bite. Luna shifted, constantly unsettled, letting out low growls whenever the forest pressed too close to the road, as though warning against unseen eyes. Jonas felt the pull of doubt stronger with each mile. What was he chasing? A rotting house on a barren rock? A legacy nobody wanted? Or was it simply a place where the weight of the world could no longer reach him? By the time he reached the small Oregon town nearest the coast, dawn was breaking, in pale strokes of gray and gold across the horizon. The air was sharper, tinged with the metallic edge of sea spray. The town was sleepy, its streets lined with old clapboard shops and faded signs that had weathered decades of storm. Fishermen moved quietly along the docks, their boots clapping against wet wood as they prepared for the day. Jonas parked the truck near a rundown diner, the kind with cracked neon lights buzzing faintly in the morning chill. Inside, the smell of burnt coffee and frying bacon hit him like a memory of simpler days. He sat in the corner booth, Atlas. Beneath the table, Luna stretched along the bench beside him. The waitress, an older woman with tired eyes but a kind smile, set a mug of coffee before him without asking. She glanced at the dogs but said nothing, only nodding, as though she understood they belonged with him as much as the clothes on his back. Jonas ate in silence, his thoughts circling the same question: what lay ahead at that forsaken house? When he finally asked the locals about the place, the responses were always the same. Raised brows muttered, warnings, vague gestures toward the sea. Old Keen's place. Nobody's gone there in years, one man said, his voice carrying the weight of superstition. The sea takes what it wants. Best not to linger on that rock. Another added, it's just an old ruin. You won't find comfort there. But none of them looked him in the eye when they spoke, and Jonas felt the twinge of something unspoken in their reluctance. Later at the marina, he stood with his dogs beside a dented aluminum boat offered by an old fisherman. The man's skin was as weathered as the planks beneath his boots, his eyes sharp and measuring. It'll get you there, the fisherman said, patting the boat. But don't expect it to welcome you. That place hasn't seen care in decades. Whatever's waiting there, it'll test you. Jonas nodded, paying what little money he had left, and the man's gaze lingered on him for a moment longer, almost pitying. The boat ride was short but merciless. The sea churned beneath them, its waves slapping against the thin hull with each rise and fall. Jonas gripped the tiller, his knuckles white as the spray soaked his jacket. Atlas braced himself at the bow muscles, taut eyes fixed on the looming silhouette of the house perched on the jagged rock ahead. Luna stood close to Jonas, her fur whipped by the wind, her body tense with anticipation. The house emerged slowly from the mist, its outline like a scar against the horizon. It was worse than he had imagined. The wooden structure leaned precariously to one side, its roof sagging, shingles long since torn away by storms. Windows dark and hollow stared like empty eyes over the crashing waves below. The path that had once connected the rock to the mainland was long gone, swallowed by the sea, leaving only broken stumps of beams jutting from the water like skeletal fingers. Jonas felt a heaviness press against him, a weight of disappointment and inevitability. This was no home. This was exile. Yet when the boat scraped against the stone outcrop, and Atlas leapt first onto the rock, followed swiftly by Luna, Jonas knew there was no turning back. He hauled himself and his pack onto the slippery surface, tying the boat to a rusted iron ring embedded in the stone. Together they climbed the uneven path toward the house, each step carrying the sound of waves crashing below like an endless reminder of isolation. The key trembled in his hand as he reached the door. The lock groaned in protest, as though the house itself resisted his presence. With a final twist, the door swung inward, releasing a breath of damp, stale air. Dust swirled in the weak light, settling over shrouded furniture and cracked walls. The scent of brine and decay filled his lungs, clinging to the back of his throat. Atlas pressed close to his leg, tail rigid, while Luna padded ahead, nose twitching furiously at the unfamiliar smells. Jonas stood there, framed in the doorway, the storm-beaten man and his two loyal dogs staring into the ruins of his inheritance. Every part of him wanted to curse the absurdity of it all, to turn back, to leave the wreck behind. But something deeper held him there, Some sense that this place, however broken, had chosen him. He set his pack down on the warped floorboards and let the door creak shut behind him. Silence settled in, broken only by the distant crash of the sea. Jonas rubbed his face with calloused hands, his heart heavy with confusion. This was what his life had come to: a veteran, with no fortune, no family beside him, only 2 dogs and a house that looked ready to collapse at the next storm. Yet as Luna barked softly at a corner of the room, and Atlas lay at his feet with quiet loyalty, Jonas felt the faintest ember of resolve kindle inside him. He whispered to himself, almost as if to convince his own spirit, "This is where we start." The words hung in the dim air, fragile but certain. The first night on the rock was harsh. The wind clawed at the walls, rattling the broken shutters until they banged like warning drums. The roof leaked steadily, dripping cold water into rusted pans Jonas had set out to catch the flow. He lay awake on a makeshift bedroll, the weight of his rifle beside him, more out of habit than necessity. Atlas slept upright, ears pricked, a sentinel against dangers real or imagined. Luna curled into his side, her body warmth seeping into him like a silent promise that he was not entirely forsaken. As dawn broke gray and merciless, Jonas rose to the reality of his new existence. He stepped outside with his dogs at his heels, the sea spray coating his skin, the horizon stretching endless and unforgiving. He drew in a deep breath, filling his chest with air sharp enough to sting, and whispered again, this time with more strength, "We'll make it through." Thus began the first chapter of his life on the rock, not with triumph, but with grit, not with welcome, but with resistance. He did not know what secrets the house held, or why fate had placed him here, but with Atlas and Luna by his side, Jonas Keene would endure whatever waited. This place, cursed or chosen, was now his battlefield, and he was ready to face it. The days after Jonas first crossed the threshold of that broken house bled into one another with the rhythm of survival. What began as shock and despair at the ruins he had inherited slowly transformed into a grinding routine, each moment demanding his effort, each hour asking for his resilience. The house, battered by decades of storms, resisted him at every turn. The roof sagged, the windows let in the relentless sea wind, and the walls seemed to sigh with exhaustion whenever the tide pounded against the rock below. Yet Jonas, with Atlas and Luna at his side, refused to let the decay claim him. He had survived worse. He had walked through nights filled with fire and chaos overseas, and though this battle was quieter, lonelier, it was no less consuming. Each morning began with the cold slap of air seeping through the cracks in the walls. Jonas would rise from his bedroll, his back stiff from sleeping on warped planks, and stoke a small fire with driftwood gathered from the shore. Atlas stood watch by the doorway, his posture always straight, his gaze scanning the mist like a soldier on patrol. Luna, restless and curious, darted in and out of rooms, sniffing corners as if she expected some hidden intruder. The routine anchored Jonas in a way that reminded him of his days in the service. There was safety in repetition, in knowing what had to be done next. But survival was never easy. Food was scarce, the supplies Jonas had carried dwindling quickly. Once a day, when the tide allowed, he would take the dented aluminum boat back to the mainland. The trip was treacherous, the waves slapping the hull with each crossing, and the stares of the townspeople grew heavier each time he returned. They saw him as the strange veteran on the rock, the man who had inherited nothing of value and yet stubbornly clung to it. Some whispered when he passed, some turned their eyes away, but Jonas ignored them. Atlas's steady gaze and Luna's insistent nudge against his hand gave him all the acknowledgement he needed. The isolation pressed down hardest at night. When the wind shrieked through the broken shutters and the house creaked as if it might collapse, Jonas would lie awake, staring at the shadows that stretched across the ceiling. Memories from the battlefield would rise, unbidden faces fire, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing across his skull. In those moments, Atlas would shift closer, pressing the weight of his body against Jonas's side, a living reminder that he was not alone. Luna, sensing his unease, would curl by his feet and let out low, steady whines until his breath matched hers. The dogs became his anchors, tethering him to the present whenever the ghosts of his past tried to drag him back. Repairing the house became his mission. Jonas scavenged what he could from town boards, nails, scraps of metal, and patched the roof with hands that had once assembled rifles and dug trenches. He sealed cracks with tar-boarded broken windows and cleared out the rot that had crept through the foundation. His hands grew calloused, his shoulders burned with the weight of labor, but with every nail hammered, with every leak patched, he felt a faint sense of purpose ignite. Atlas followed him from room to room like a shadow, always silent, always steady. Luna, less patient, often distracted herself by pawing at the walls or digging in the corners of the house where the damp seemed to linger. Jonas scolded her at first, worried she might hurt herself, but he began to notice that she wasn't acting out of boredom. She was searching, sensing something beneath the surface. There were days when the sea tested him more fiercely than any war had. Storms would roll in without warning, waves hammering the rock with terrifying force. On those days, Jonas and the dogs huddled in the center of the house, listening to the howl of the wind and the thunder of the ocean, as though the world itself was trying to erase them. Atlas growled low and steady at every crash, his protective stance never faltering, while Luna whimpered, burying her head against Jonas's chest. He wrapped his arms around both of them, whispering promises he wasn't sure he could keep, that they would outlast the storm that the house would hold, that he wouldn't let the sea take them. The bond between man and dogs deepened with each trial. Jonas began speaking to them more often, not just commands, but thoughts, memories, even fears. "Atlas," he would murmur, when exhaustion threatened to break him, "you remind me of the men I served with, always steady, never flinching." And to Luna, who would tilt her head as if listening with her whole heart, he confessed the doubts he could never voice aloud. "You know, girl, maybe they were right. Maybe this place is nothing but ruins. But you keep digging, don't you? You think there's more." Their presence gave him the courage to face another day, to rise and fight against the elements, even when the emptiness of the rock threatened to drown him. One evening, as the sun bled red into the sea and the horizon shimmered with fading light, Jonas sat on the front steps of the house, watching the tide roll in. Atlas lay beside him, eyes half closed, but ears twitching at every sound. Luna paced the shoreline, her paws kicking up sand as she followed an invisible trail. Jonas felt the loneliness clawing at him again, but when Atlas pressed his head against his shoulder, he exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "It's just us," he said softly. "Just us against the world." The following weeks were filled with small victories and relentless challenges. Jonas managed to secure a working generator, hauling fuel from town, despite the suspicious glances of those who sold it to him. He repaired a section of the roof so that the rain no longer poured directly onto his bedroll. He even carved out a small space for Atlas and Luna, laying down blankets and scavenged wood so they had a place of warmth beside him. The house, though still weather-beaten and fragile, began to feel less like a ruin and more like a fortress. Imperfect, temporary, but theirs. Yet with each improvement came new obstacles. Supplies ran low, faster than expected. A storm destroyed part of the makeshift dock he had built, leaving him stranded on the rock for days with only stale bread and a dwindling supply of water. The cold seeped into his bones, numbing his fingers, until even striking a match felt like lifting a stone. Through it all, Atlas never left his side, his steady breathing a rhythm Jonas clung to. Luna, restless and alert, began pawing more furiously at a damp corner of the main room, whining at something Jonas could not yet see. At first he dismissed it as nerves. Dogs could sense storms, shifts in the wind, things beyond human perception. But as days passed, and Luna's insistence grew, Jonas began to feel it too, that something about the house, about the rock beneath it, was not what it seemed. Late at night, when the storm outside paused just long enough for silence to creep in, he thought he heard a faint hum rising from beneath the floorboards, like the whisper of a hidden current. He pressed his palm against the warped wood, but all he felt was the chill of damp. Still, Luna kept digging her paws, scraping at the boards, until Atlas nudged her back as though to say patience was needed. Jonas found himself caught between skepticism and belief. War had taught him to trust instinct, to listen when something seemed out of place. His survival often depended on it. Now, with Luna's relentless determination and Atlas's steady presence reinforcing her, he began to wonder if the house held more than rot and ruin. Perhaps his inheritance was not simply a cruel joke, not a burden meant to break him, but a doorway to something yet unseen. The sea hammered the rock, the wind tore at the walls, and hunger gnawed at his body. But Jonas endured. With Atlas standing guard, and Luna leading him toward mysteries buried beneath the floor, he began to feel a shift inside himself. He was no longer just a forgotten veteran clinging to scraps of a ruined life. He was a man on the cusp of discovery, guided by loyalty, love, and the unspoken bond between human and animal. And though he could not yet name it, though he could not yet see beyond the broken boards and leaking roof, Jonas felt certain that his journey had only just begun, and that the true weight of his inheritance was waiting for him beneath the surface. It began with Luna's paws scratching furiously against the damp corner of the main room. Jonas had grown used to her restless energy. She was the type of dog who never settled unless her instincts were satisfied. But this was different. She wasn't just pacing or whining at shadows. She was fixated, her body taut, her claws tearing at the warped wood as if something beneath it demanded her attention. Atlas stood nearby, not intervening, his head tilted, his steady gaze fixed on Jonas. It was as if the shepherd knew, as if he was waiting for Jonas to see what Luna had already sensed. At first, Jonas tried to stop her. "Easy, girl," he muttered, pulling her back by the collar. She resisted, letting out sharp, frustrated barks, before lunging forward again, her paws striking the same spot with renewed force. The sound echoed through the empty room, and Jonas, weary from weeks of battling storms and isolation, felt his patience thinning. But then something shifted. The hollow thud of wood against wood gave way to a sound that was different, deeper, metallic. Jonas froze, his ears straining. He knelt beside Luna and pressed his knuckles to the floor. When he knocked, the noise reverberated strangely, as if the boards concealed a cavity below. A current of unease ran through him, the kind that soldiers feel when the world is too quiet, when the silence hides danger. He thought of dismissing it, thought of patching the boards and walking away. But Luna wouldn't let him. She pawed again, whining with urgency, and Atlas moved closer, planting himself beside Jonas with the solid calm of a soldier guarding his commander. Jonas drew a slow breath, the damp air stinging his lungs, and muttered, "All right then, let's see what you found." He fetched the crowbar he had scavenged from the marina shed and returned to the spot. Luna backed away just far enough to give him space, her eyes locked on his every movement. Atlas stood behind them, silent but alert. Jonas wedged the bar beneath the first board and heaved. The wood resisted, swollen from years of damp, but with a groan and a splintering crack it came free. The smell hit him immediately, wet, metallic, and strangely clean, unlike the rot that filled the rest of the house. He pulled up another board, and another, until a recessed iron ring revealed itself, rusted with age, but unmistakably crafted by human hands. Jonas's pulse quickened, his grip tightened on the crowbar. This was no accident, no mere flaw in the foundation. Someone had built this, concealed it, and left it waiting. He stared at the iron ring, his breath caught between disbelief and dread. "What the hell?" he whispered, his voice nearly swallowed by the endless crash of waves outside. Atlas growled low, not in warning but in recognition, as though he too understood the gravity of what lay beneath. Luna pressed her nose against the hatch, whining softly, urging Jonas to act. His hands trembled as he wrapped them around the cold metal ring and pulled. At first it didn't move, sealed by time and salt. He braced his boots against the floor and heaved again, a guttural sound tearing from his chest. The hatch groaned like a beast waking from slumber, and then with a final violent crack it lifted. A rush of air escaped, cool and crisp, so unlike the stagnant dampness of the house above. Jonas leaned over the opening, his flashlight beam slicing through the darkness below. The light revealed a narrow staircase descending into the earth, not carved of stone or patched with wood, but poured concrete, smooth and deliberate. It was impossibly clean, untouched by the decay of the house above. Jonas felt his heart hammering in his chest every instinct screaming caution, but curiosity, perhaps desperation, pulled him forward. "Stay close," he whispered, though he knew he didn't need to say it. Atlas descended first, his paws steady on the steps, ears alert to every sound. Luna followed, brushing against Jonas's leg, as if to make sure he kept moving. Each step took them further from the ruin above, and deeper into a place that seemed carved from another world. The air grew colder, sharper tinged, with the faint smell of oil and ozone. At the bottom, Jonas stepped into a chamber that made him stop cold. He had expected darkness mold the skeletal remains of some forgotten cellar. Instead, the beam of his flashlight swept across gleaming surfaces, stainless steel tables, shelves lined with neatly ordered books and instruments, machines that looked like they belonged in a laboratory, not under a rotting house on the sea. Jonas's breath caught in his throat. He turned in slow circles, the beam of light catching on blueprints pinned to a corkboard star. Charts spread across a drafting table, cabinets filled with notebooks. At the center of the room stood something immense and draped in canvas, its silhouette a mass of gears and coils that seemed to hum, even in stillness. It was impossible out of place, and yet it felt deliberate, purposeful. Atlas patted forward his nose, brushing the edge of a workbench. Luna sniffed the air, her tail wagging cautiously, as though this strange sanctuary answered some instinct she had carried all along. Jonas set down his pack with trembling hands and pulled the canvas from the central machine. Beneath it stood a creation of brass, copper, and glass, a complex structure of interlocking gears, dials, and a crystalline sphere at its heart that seemed to glow faintly under the flashlight's beam. Jonas stared, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was seeing. This was no tool for farming or fishing, no simple mechanism. It was something far greater, something he didn't yet understand. On the main workbench lay a leather-bound journal, its cover cracked with age. His name embossed faintly in gold leaf, Jonas Keene. His fingers shook as he picked it up, the weight of it heavier than any rifle he had carried. He opened to the first page, and his breath stilled at the handwriting inside. Neat, deliberate, unmistakably familiar. It was the hand of his grandfather. Jonas sank onto the stool, Atlas pressing close to his leg, Luna resting her head on his foot. He read in silence, the words unfolding like a voice from the grave. His grandfather wrote not of money or land, but of years spent chasing knowledge of a device that could sense the hidden tremors of the earth, the whispers of the sea, the pulse of storms before they broke. It was a machine built not for profit, but for protection. A tool that could give warning, save lives, change the way humanity faced disaster. Jonas's throat tightened as he read further. His grandfather wrote of him directly, calling him by name, acknowledging the pain of war, the loneliness that had followed. "You were always the one who asked for nothing but time," the word said, "and so I give you what I could not share with others, the work of my life, the responsibility of it, and the companions I trusted to guide you." Jonas looked down at Luna and Atlas, both watching him with steady devotion, and his chest ached with the weight of understanding. His grandfather had not left him alone on this rock as punishment. He had entrusted him with a legacy. The journal detailed training given to Atlas's lineage, the careful breeding and preparation of dogs who could sense subtle shifts beyond human perception. Luna's presence, though newer, was no accident either. Her restless energy, her instinct to dig, her refusal to accept surfaces as truth. They were not merely pets. They were chosen guardians, designed to guide Jonas toward this moment. Jonas closed the journal, his mind reeling. He ran his hands over the machine's cold brass frame, the hum of possibility vibrating beneath his fingertips. He thought of the storms he had endured already, of the sea that battered the rock, day after day. If what his grandfather claimed was true, this device could predict them all. It could turn chaos into warning, fear into preparation. But more than that, it was a lesson, a reminder that value was not measured in wealth or status, but in purpose. His family had mocked him, cast him aside, but here, in the hidden heart of a ruined house, he had found something worth more than all their riches combined. He had found a mission. Jonas sat back, his breath uneven, Atlas's warm head pressing against his knee, Luna licking his hand as if to ground him. The room hummed quietly around them, alive with knowledge, with history, with expectation. He whispered into the still air, his voice breaking, "Grandfather, what did you leave me to finish?" The dogs didn't answer, but their eyes told him what he already knew. The house above might crumble, the sea might rage, but here in the depths lay a legacy forged not from stone or timber, but from foresight and love. It was no accident he had been brought here. It was a calling, and Jonas, keen, weary soldier, abandoned heir, would carry it forward. The hatch closed above them, sealing away the world of decay, but below, in the glow of discovery, Jonas understood that his inheritance was never meant to break him. It was meant to awaken him. And the journey that had begun in despair was transforming into something far greater. A story not of ruin, but of redemption. Jonas had grown used to silence on the rock. The rhythm of waves, the steady hum of the machine below, and the presence of Atlas and Luna had become his world. But silence never lasts, not when greed is a language spoken louder than storms. It began one afternoon when the sound of an engine cut through the roar of the sea. Jonas stood at the window, the board still crooked but holding, and saw a gleaming white yacht anchored just beyond the breakers. Its polished sides and arrogant horn were as out of place as a golden coin in the mud. Jonas's stomach turned cold. He knew that boat, and he knew the people it carried. Atlas growled low at his side. Ears pinned his body rigid with warning. Luna pressed close to the door, tail stiff, whining with unease. Jonas rubbed a hand over his face, the old ache of family resentment flaring like a wound he thought had scarred. His father, his siblings, those who had mocked him for inheriting this forsaken place, had come. Not for him, not out of love, but because they had heard whispers. Whispers of lights on the rock of the recluse, who kept to himself of something hidden in the ruins. He went down to meet them on the rocky shore. The smaller tender scraped against the stones, expensive shoes, stepping onto the damp surface with disgust. His father stood tall, his mother's eyes narrowed with disdain, his brother's smirk as sharp as ever, and his sister's expression bored as if this confrontation was a tiresome errand. They looked at him not as family, but as an obstacle. "Well, well," his brother sneered, brushing imaginary dust from his jacket. "Look at the hermit. We were so worried, Jonas. Living all alone out here must be miserable." His words dripped with sarcasm, his eyes glinting with something colder than contempt, hunger. Jonas kept his voice level. "Why are you here?" His father stepped forward, adjusting his coat as if the sea air offended him. "We came to see what you're hiding. Word has reached town. You've been rebuilding, working. Perhaps grandfather left more than we thought. Perhaps you've been keeping it from us." Jonas felt Atlas press against his leg, steady and protective, while Luna circled behind him, her growl low and constant. He held his ground. "This place isn't yours. He left it to me." That shack, his mother scoffed, glancing at the weathered structure. "Don't be absurd. He must have left more. Something valuable. Do you think we'll just let you squander it?" They pushed past him without waiting for an answer, climbing toward the house with careless entitlement. Jonas followed, tension burning in his chest. He wanted to block the door, to protect what lay beneath. But his brother had already noticed the section of floor where the boards had been replaced. "What's this?" he asked, crouching, his hands pressing against the edges. The triumphant gleam in his eyes made Jonas's blood run hot. "You've been hiding something." "Leave it alone," Jonas said, his voice harder now, his steps quickening. But his brother had already pulled up the hatch, the iron ring groaning as the secret below yawned open. The family gasped as they descended into the laboratory, their expensive clothes brushing against the clean concrete walls, their skepticism giving way to greed. They stared at the machine, at the shelves of books, at the endless potential. But they did not see purpose. They did not see the work of a man who wanted to protect lives. They saw profit, power, and inheritance worth fighting for. "This," his father whispered, running a hand over the smooth surface of a workbench. "This is real. This is worth something." His brother turned on him, face twisted with accusation. "You've been lying to us, Jonas. You knew about this all along. You thought you'd keep it for yourself." It's not what you think. Jonas tried, stepping between them and the heart of the machine. This isn't money. It's not meant for you to sell. It's meant to help, to warn, to protect. His mother's laugh was sharp, bitter. Protect, don't be naive. Machines like this change markets, governments, entire nations. And you, her gaze swept over his worn clothes, his scarred face, his dogs at his heels. You are not fit to hold it. Jonas felt anger surge, but before he could respond, Atlas moved. The shepherd planted himself firmly between Jonas and his advancing brother, his body, tense lips curling back just enough to reveal gleaming teeth. A growl, deep and resonant, filled the concrete room. The sound vibrated in Jonas's bones, primal and absolute. His brother froze mid-step, arrogance draining from his face, replaced by the pale recognition of real danger. Luna added her voice, not with a growl, but with sharp, insistent barks that echoed off the walls, her body pressed protectively against Jonas's side. Together, the dogs became a wall of loyalty and ferocity, guardians of both man and machine. For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. The family, so used to power and control, found themselves powerless against the raw force of two animals willing to die for their master. Jonas's hand rested lightly on Atlas's back, his own stance firm. "This isn't yours," he said quietly, but with a finality that rang louder than any shout. It never was. The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. His brother snarled, shoving past his parents, his hand raised as if to strike. But before he could close the distance, Atlas lunged forward, teeth bared in silent, warning his body, a barrier Jonas knew could break bones if pushed. His father shouted, his mother gasped, his sister stumbled back against the wall, but Jonas didn't flinch. He met his brother's gaze head-on, his voice steady. "You will not take this from me." The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with the collision of greed and resolve. Then slowly his brother lowered his hand, his bravado crumbling under the weight of Atlas's growl and Luna's relentless barking. He stepped back, eyes wide, with a mixture of fear and fury. Jonas's family retreated toward the stairs, muttering accusations and empty threats, but none dared touch the machine again. The spell of entitlement had been broken, shattered not by Jonas's words alone, but by the unshakable bond of loyalty that stood beside him. When the hatch slammed shut above them, and their voices faded into the roar of the sea, Jonas let out a long, shuddering breath. Atlas pressed his head against Jonas's hip. Luna licked his hand, their eyes filled with trust and defiance. Jonas sank to the floor, the hum of the machine filling the silence. He realized then that the true danger was not storms or hunger, but the greed of those who would strip meaning from sacrifice and purpose from legacy. Yet he also understood something deeper. He was not alone in this fight. Atlas and Luna had drawn a line the world could not cross. Together they had protected the truth. The world outside would come again. Greed was tireless, but Jonas felt the strength of his companions, and with it, the certainty that no matter what forces came against them, this legacy would not fall so easily. The tension of the confrontation with his family still lingered in the air like smoke after a fire, but Jonas barely had time to breathe before the world itself turned against them. It started with Atlas, his ears snapping forward, his body stiffening in a way Jonas had learned to trust without question. Luna followed with a sharp, frantic bark, pacing toward the stairs, her body trembling with urgency. Jonas's family mocked the dog's sudden agitation, dismissing it as noise, but Jonas knew better. He felt it too, an almost imperceptible vibration beneath the floor, a shift in the air that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. Then the machine confirmed it. The crystalline sphere at its center, which usually glowed faintly, pulsed with an ominous red light that bathed the laboratory in a bloody glow. The seismograph needle on the console spiked violently, and gauges labeled in his grandfather's meticulous script began to whirl and fall out of control. Pressure dropped. Wind speed climbed. The machine's warning was clear. Something catastrophic was imminent. Jonas's voice cut through the growing panic. "We have to seal the hatch. Now. A storm is coming." His father scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "Look outside, Jonas. The sky was clear when we came. You're letting your dogs and this contraption make you hysterical." Jonas's jaw tightened. This isn't a guess. It's here. The machine is reading it, and if we don't take shelter, we won't survive. Atlas growled again low and insistent, his body planted firmly between Jonas and the stairs, as though daring anyone to defy his master's words. Luna barked in sharp, urgent bursts, pulling at Jonas's sleeve with her teeth, urging him toward action. His family's denial meant nothing. He trusted the dogs. He trusted the legacy his grandfather had left. The first impact hit before he could say more. A violent shudder ripped through the rock, knocking his sister to her knees and sending equipment rattling off shelves. A deafening crack echoed from above, as waves smashed against the foundation. Jonas sprinted to the heavy hatch and slammed it shut. Just as water began pouring down the stairs, the sound of the house above, being torn apart by the sea filling the chamber. The storm unleashed itself in full fury. The workshop groaned, concrete trembling, as if under siege. The roar of the wind was so loud it drowned out his mother's scream. So relentless it felt like the ocean itself was trying to claw its way into the sanctuary. Jonas pressed his back against the hatch, bracing it with all his strength as the sea hammered from above. Atlas stood shoulder to shoulder with him, snarling at the invisible threat, while Luna whined and shoved against his legs, her eyes wide with a fear that mirrored his own. His family huddled in the far corner, stripped of their arrogance, their wealth and power, meaningless in the face of nature's wrath. Jonas looked at them then, at the machine still glowing red, its gauges screaming warnings. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. This was not just a device, it was a responsibility. He realized now why it had been entrusted to him, not because he sought power, but because he understood sacrifice. The hours that followed were a blur of noise and terror. The storm tore apart the house above, beams and boards crashing down onto the hatch. Water seeped through cracks, spraying against Jonas's back as he fought to keep the wheel of the door locked tight. His muscles burned, his lungs ached, but he refused to yield. Atlas leaned against him, a solid wall of muscle, while Luna licked his hand, grounding him in the chaos. Together they endured as the world outside was unmade. Finally, as dawn broke, silence replaced the chaos. The storm had spent its fury. The only sound left was the gentle lap of waves and the ragged breaths of those who had survived. Jonas staggered back, his body trembling with exhaustion, and with Atlas and Luna at his side, he forced the hatch open. They emerged into a world forever changed. The house was gone, every trace of it scoured from the rock. Only the flat concrete roof of the workshop remained battered but unbroken. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, as if mocking the devastation below. His family stumbled out behind him, their faces pale with shock, stripped of all pretense. Jonas stood at the edge of the rock, Atlas and Luna flanking him, and for the first time he felt the full weight of what his inheritance truly meant. The machine had warned them, the dogs had guided him, and together they had saved not only themselves, but the town beyond the horizon. He knew then that this was not just survival, not just the aftermath of a storm. This was the moment his story shifted the bridge between despair and purpose. As a helicopter's blades thumped in the distance, growing louder as rescue approached, Jonas rested a hand on Atlas's head and whispered to Luna, his voice steady despite the ruin around him. "We made it, and this is only the beginning." The storm had destroyed the house, but it had revealed the truth. The legacy was not in timber or stone, but in knowledge, loyalty, and the will to act when others faltered. That truth would carry Jonas into the next chapter of his life, and nothing, not greed, not storms, not even the ghosts of his past, could take it from him. Jonas Keen's journey had begun with humiliation, a so-called inheritance that others mocked as worthless, and the crushing silence of exile. Yet what seemed like ruin became the crucible that forged his purpose. The broken house on the rock was not the end of his story, but the doorway into his grandfather's hidden legacy. A machine designed to protect a mission built on sacrifice and a bond with Atlas and Luna that proved stronger than the fury of self. The sea, or the greed of family. Together they had faced storms no man could control, betrayal that cut deeper than war, and the unrelenting weight of isolation. And still they endured. Through every trial, Atlas stood as his shield, steadfast and immovable, while Luna's restless energy unearthed the secrets buried beneath the floor. They were not simply dogs. They were his companions, his guardians, and his compass. With them, Jonas discovered that true inheritance is not gold or land, but loyalty, courage, and the will to carry forward a legacy that matters. But this story does not end with the storm. The machine remains unfinished, its potential vast and terrifying. The world beyond the rock still knows nothing of the danger it faces, nor of the man who now holds the key to predicting nature's wrath. And Jonas, scarred, veteran turned, reluctant guardian, must decide how far he is willing to go to protect not just his family, but strangers who may never know his name. What would you do if you were in his place? Would you share the secret with the world, or guard it against those who would twist it for profit? Tell us in the comments where you stand and whether you believe Jonas can shoulder this responsibility. And if this story stirred something in you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Because Jonas Keen's journey is only beginning, and the next chapter will reveal dangers far greater than storms and greed. Stay with us. What comes next will leave you breathless.